I had completely forgotten about Planet Schmelephant. Arthur Writes a Story is an episode that I could remember vaguely. I remembered the title. I believe this was a book that I had at one point, but I couldn't remember the specifics. And then I started watching it, and the Planet Schmelephant song just brought all of the memories back to me, and I absolutely loved this episode. So it's weird, of course, that I didn't remember it in that much detail, but nevertheless, I loved it then, I loved it now, because I was Arthur. This is the 12th episode of the first season, and directed, of course, by Greg Bailey. And the reason I am Arthur in this episode is because I wrote stories constantly. And obviously, with Arthur sitting down to try and write his story, there was an element of relatability there. And the class, Mr. Ratburn, has tasked the class with writing their own stories, either something that's based on truth or something that they've made up. And Arthur begins by writing about how he got Pal, which is a story that happened a couple of episodes previously. But DW kind of says, why would you write about that? That's going to be boring. Nobody wants to hear about that. And Arthur begins to worry that his story isn't going to be interesting enough. So he talks to his friends, asks other people's opinions, and what started out as a very basic, true story about how he got his dog becomes this elaborate, far-fetched fantasy, which in itself is absolutely fine. They were allowed to write stories that were make-believe, that were from their imaginations, but it evolves into something that's quite spectacular, but very peculiar. And I won't say, in case you haven't seen the episode or if you can't remember it, I won't say any more about the Planet Schmelephant song, or how Arthur even got to the point where he was singing a song about a planet called Schmelephant when he was meant to be writing about his dog. But the creative process that we get to see is very fascinating indeed. And, you know, for me, speaking as a writer, there is that pressure that what you're writing about isn't going to be interesting enough. But at the same time, it's a human interest piece, and people like these kinds of stories because they're relatable, they might be sweet or heartfelt. But that's not to say that the story that Arthur did come up with wasn't creative. It just wasn't the story he was trying to tell, and he kind of got away from it a bit. But I really thoroughly enjoyed it. Even now as an adult, watching Arthur try and write a story, really thoroughly enjoyed it. Definitely one that I remember liking, and once I kind of heard that Planet Schmelephant song, all of the memories came flooding back, and I had a nice little time watching it. It's definitely really enjoyable. It also fits in quite nicely with the second segment of this episode, which is Arthur's Lost Dog. That episode, I couldn't remember, it didn't bring back any memories. It's not a bad segment, but certainly Arthur Writes a Story has to be one of my favourite episodes of Arthur to date.